The laughter came at 2:47 a.m. Sarah heard it first, a low, wet chuckle crackling through the baby monitor on her nightstand. Not the gurgling baby sounds she'd grown used to over the past 6 months. This was something else. Something wrong. She nudged Tom awake. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" His voice was thick with sleep. Then it came again. A man's laugh. Deep and amused. Like someone had just heard the punchline to a particularly dark joke. Tom sat up fast. What the hell? They both stared at the monitor's glowing screen. The infrared camera showed Emma's crib in shades of green and gray. The baby lay on her back, perfectly still, arms spread like a starfish, sleeping peacefully. But the laughter continued. Is someone in there? Sarah was already out of bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd read the stories hackers breaking into baby monitors, strangers watching through cameras. But this felt different. Worse. Tom grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight. They moved down the hallway together, their shadows stretching long against the walls. Sarah's bare feet were silent on the hardwood floor. The laughter had stopped now, replaced by static and the faint sound of Emma's breathing through the monitor speaker. Tom pushed open the nursery door. Empty crib. No, Emma. No, no, no. Sarah rushed forward, her hands grasping at the empty sheets, still warm from her daughter's body. The mobile above the crib, little felt stars and moons spun slowly. Though there was no breeze, she was just there, Tom said, pointing at the monitor in his other hand. She's right there on the screen. Sarah looked. He was right. The monitor still showed Emma sleeping soundly in her crib, that same starfish position. But when Sarah looked up at the actual crib in front of her, it was empty. This isn't possible, she whispered. The laughter came again, not from the room, but from the monitor's speaker. Closer now. Intimate, like whoever was laughing was pressed right up against the microphone. Turn it off, Sarah said. Tom, turn it off. But he was staring at the screen, his face gone pale in the glow. Sarah, look! On the monitor, something was moving in the crib. Not Emma. Too big to be Emma. It unfolded itself with terrible slowness, joints bending at angles that made Sarah's stomach turn. Long limbs, a shape that suggested a human body but wrong, distorted. Like looking at someone through warped glass. That's not our baby, Tom said. His voice had gone flat, mechanical. That was never our baby. The thing on the screen turned its head, that too large head toward the camera. Sarah couldn't see its face in the infrared blur, but she felt it looking at them. Through the monitor, through the distance between that captured image and this moment. The laughter came again, and this time Sarah recognized something in it. A familiar cadence. The same laugh Emma had given yesterday when Tom made funny faces during bath time. Her daughter's joy played through a broken instrument. Where's Emma? Sarah's voice cracked. Where's our baby? The thing on the monitor began to crawl, not toward the camera, toward the edge of the crib. Its movements were liquid, boneless, flowing over the wooden bars like oil. It's coming out, Tom said. It's coming out of the crib. Sarah looked at the real crib still empty. Then back at the monitor. The creature had one leg over the railing now, testing the air with elongated fingers. We have to find Emma. Sarah grabbed Tom's arm. We have to. The monitor screen went dark. In the sudden silence, they heard it. The creak of wood from downstairs. The sound of their front door slowly opening. And then, drifting up the stairwell, Emma's crying. Their daughter's voice. Unmistakable. And terrified. But underneath it, woven through it like a second melody, that adult laughter continued. It's not on the monitor anymore, Tom whispered, looking down at the dark screen. It's not in the recorded past. Sarah understood then, with a clarity that felt like ice water in her veins. The monitor hadn't been showing them what was happening in real time. It had been showing them what already happened. Hours ago, days ago. Some version of their daughter's room that existed just slightly out of sync with reality. And whatever had been crawling out of that remembered crib had finally caught up to the present moment. Emma's crying grew louder downstairs. They both knew they had to go down there, had to follow that sound. But as Tom's foot hit the first stair, the laughter came again. Not from any monitor now, but from the walls themselves, from the air around them, from somewhere deep in the foundations of the house they'd thought was safe. And Sarah realized they'd been wrong about one terrible thing. They hadn't heard an intruder through the monitor. They'd heard whatever had been wearing their daughter's shape all along, finally revealing itself. The crying stopped. The laughter didn't. Asterisk. The police would find the house empty in the morning. 2 cars in the driveway. 3 phones left behind. The baby monitor still running in the nursery. Its camera recording an empty crib, hour after hour after hour. If anyone had bothered to review the footage from that night, they would have seen nothing unusual. Just a baby sleeping peacefully, until 2:47 a.m., when the crib emptied and stayed empty. The camera kept recording the space where a child should have been, transmitting its signal to a monitor no one was left to watch. Asterisk. The Harpers left 47 Maple Drive on a Tuesday in October, and by Thursday, they'd convinced themselves the worst was behind them. Good riddance, Mark said. Watching the old place shrink in the rearview mirror, Jennifer sat beside him, quiet, while their daughter Casey pressed her face against the back window until the house disappeared around a corner. They didn't talk about why they were leaving. Not really. They used words like fresh start and better opportunities. But the truth sat between them, like a fourth passenger, heavy and unwelcome. The things they'd heard in that house, the cold spots in Casey's room, the way shadows moved wrong in the hallway mirror. The new place was 300 miles away, a ranch-style home in a development called Sunset Hills. Modern. Safe. Nothing like 47 Maple Drive with its peeling paint and dark windows and that front door that never seemed to stay closed, no matter how many times Mark checked the lock. They unpacked. They enrolled Casey in school. They bought new furniture because Jennifer said she didn't want anything from the old house contaminating their fresh start. Mark thought that was a bit much, but he understood. He'd felt it too, that sense that the house had gotten into their things somehow. Into them. 3 weeks later, Mark saw it on his morning run. He was jogging through a neighborhood 6 blocks from Sunset Hills, subdivisions he'd never explored before. The sun was just coming up, and the houses cast long shadows across empty lawns. He rounded a corner, and there it was, 47 Maple Drive. Same peaked roof, same cracked driveway, same rusted mailbox with the number 47 hanging crooked. The paint was the exact shade of gray he'd grown to hate. And the oak tree out front had that same twisted branch that looked like a bent finger. Mark stopped running. His breath came in short gasps that had nothing to do with exertion. It couldn't be. They were 300 miles away, but as he stood there, he saw more details. The gutter hanging loose on the left side. The flower bed Jennifer had planted 2 springs ago, now overrun with weeds. Even the basketball hoop Casey had begged for, still mounted above the garage door. The front door was open, just a few inches, the way it had been the last morning. Mark had closed it, locked it, checked it twice. But when they'd driven away, Jennifer had looked back and said, "The door's open." Mark had told her it was just the angle, a trick of the light, but it had been open. He'd known it then. He knew it now. Mark pulled out his phone with shaking hands. He called Jennifer. "I'm seeing things," he said. "I'm going crazy, Jen. Where are you?" Her voice was tight. "Parker Street. About 6 blocks from the house. Our new house, I mean." "But Jen, I'm looking at our old house," she finished. "I know. I'm looking at it too." Mark's blood went cold. "What?" "I took Casey to school this morning. Took a different route. And there it was. Just sitting there between a pizza place and a dental office. It doesn't make sense, Mark. The spacing is wrong. There's not enough room for a house, but there it is." "What address?" "I didn't look. I just kept driving. Casey asked why our old house was here, and I told her. I told her she was seeing things." Mark looked up at the mailbox. The numbers had changed. Now it read 1,847. The address is different, Mark said. But it's our house. It's definitely our house. They agreed to meet at home, their new home. When Mark got there, Jennifer was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open. Casey at school. The house too quiet around them. I've been looking at maps, Jennifer said. Satellite views of this whole area. That house doesn't exist on Parker Street. There's an empty lot there. And the place I saw it? There's a shopping center. No houses at all. So we're both crazy, Mark said. But he didn't believe it. Or we're still asleep. Or it followed us. The words hung in the air between them. Mark wanted to laugh, to tell her that houses didn't follow people, that they were stressed and tired and letting their imaginations run wild. But he'd seen it. Every detail. The house knew things about them, their basketball hoop, their flower bed, their rusted mailbox. Why? Mark asked. Why would it follow us? Jennifer closed her laptop. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. Maybe we took something from it. Maybe we're not supposed to leave. That night, Casey woke up screaming. Mark and Jennifer rushed to her room. Their daughter stood at the window, pointing into the darkness beyond their backyard. It's out there, Casey whispered. Our old house. It's in the field. Mark looked. At first, he saw only darkness. Then his eyes adjusted, and he saw the shape outlined against the night sky. The peaked roof, the twisted oak tree, and yes, even from this distance, he could see the front door hanging open like a mouth. It wants us to come back, Casey said. Her voice was flat, distant. It's been calling me. Every night since we moved. It says we're not done yet. Mark pulled the curtains closed. You're not going anywhere near that house. But the next morning, it was closer. Mark saw it on his way to work, just sitting there at the end of their street, where yesterday there had been a stop sign and an intersection. Now there was 47 Maple Drive, squeezed impossibly between two other homes. Its architecture wrong for the neighborhood, out of place in every way except that it was undeniably real. He called in sick to work. Jennifer had already called her office. They sat together in their living room, not talking, just waiting. They could feel it now, the weight of the house's attention pressing down on them. By afternoon, they saw it from their front window. 47 Maple Drive sat directly across the street. Not where any house should be, the street was too narrow. There was no yard, no foundation. But there it was anyway, defying space and logic. The front door open, always open. What does it want? Jennifer asked. Mark didn't answer. He was watching something move in the doorway of the old house. A shadow, darker than the interior darkness. It had the rough shape of a person, but it moved all wrong, jerking and fluid at the same time. His phone buzzed. A text from Casey's school. Asterisk. Your daughter isn't feeling well. She keeps insisting she needs to go home. Can you pick her up? Asterisk. No, Jennifer said, reading over his shoulder. She can't come home. Not while that thing is out there. But it was already too late. Mark's phone buzzed again. Another text. Asterisk. Never mind. Her father already picked her up. Asterisk. Mark's hands went numb. I didn't pick her up. They were in the car in seconds, speeding toward the school. But Mark knew somewhere deep in his gut. He knew they wouldn't find Casey there. He knew where she'd gone. When they got back to Sunset Hills, 47 Maple Drive was gone from across the street, and their front door, the door to their new house, their safe house, their fresh start was standing wide open. Mark and Jennifer ran inside, calling Casey's name. But the house felt wrong. The walls were the same color they'd been, but the layout was different. The hallway was longer than it should be. The kitchen opened into a room they'd never had before. They were no longer in their house. They were in 47 Maple Drive. Casey! Jennifer screamed, but her voice echoed strange, like the walls were swallowing the sound. They found their daughter in what should have been Casey's new room, but was actually Casey's old room. The one from 47 Maple Drive. She sat on the floor, cross-legged, talking to something in the corner that Mark couldn't quite see. "Casey, we need to leave. Right now." Casey looked up at them. Her eyes were distant, dark. "We can't leave. It won't let us. It hasn't been fed in so long." "Fed?" Jennifer's voice broke. "Baby, what are you talking about?" "Houses need families," Casey said simply. "This house was empty for 3 years before we moved in. It was so hungry, and we fed it our fights, our fears, our nightmares, but then we tried to leave before it was full." Mark grabbed Casey's arm, pulling her up. "We're leaving. All of us. Now." They ran for the front door, but the hallway stretched out before them, growing longer with each step. Behind them, they could hear it. Footsteps that weren't footsteps. Movement in the walls. The sound of the house itself breathing. The front door was open ahead of them. It was always open, but as they got closer, Mark saw what lay beyond it. Not Sunset Hills, not any street in any town, just darkness. An endless, hungry darkness that smelled like dust and old wood and decades of loneliness. "You can't leave a house," Casey said from behind them, her voice not quite her own anymore. "Once a house chooses you. Once it knows you. You're part of it. You feed it. Forever." Jennifer was crying now, pulling at the door frame, trying to see past the darkness to anything real. Mark turned back to look at his daughter. "Casey, please, come with us. We'll fight this. I am with you, Daddy," Casey said. And she smiled. "We're all together now. We're all home." The darkness beyond the door began to change. Slowly, shapes emerged from it. Their new house in Sunset Hills. Their street. The real world. Maybe. But Mark understood now. The house would let them go. It would let them walk through that door and back into their lives. But 47 Maple Drive would be there too. Always in the distance. Always following. Always waiting for them to come back. Because the house was patient. Houses could wait forever. And once you belonged to a house, once it had marked you as its own, you could never really leave. You could move 300 miles or 3,000. You could burn it down or tear it apart, but it would always find you. It would always be waiting, and the front door would always be open. Asterisk. The Harpers still live in Sunset Hills. If you ask them, they'll tell you they're happy. They'll smile and talk about their daughter, who's doing well in school. They'll invite you over for dinner, but they'll never meet at your place. Always theirs. And if you come over, you might notice something strange, how the layout of their house seems to shift when you're not looking, how there's a hallway that shouldn't be there, how every door inside needs to be locked at night, and how, no matter what time you leave, no matter which direction you drive, you'll always see a house in your rearview mirror, a gray house with a twisted oak tree, with the number 47 on its mailbox, and with a front door standing open. Waiting. Always waiting. Asterisk. David Marsh discovered the frozen time on a Tuesday in March, 3 weeks after his wife left him. He'd been an insomniac since the divorce papers arrived. Most nights he sat in his recliner, nursing cheap whiskey and watching whatever garbage the late-night channels offered. That Tuesday, he happened to glance at the clock on his cable box at exactly 12:07 a.m. The numbers froze. Not like the display had broken frozen, like someone had pressed pause on reality itself. The scene on TV stopped mid-frame. The refrigerator's hum cut off. The wind outside went silent. Even the whiskey in his glass stopped moving. The little waves he'd created by swirling it locked in place like amber. David sat perfectly still. His heart the only sound in the dead world. Then he saw movement through his front window. Something walked past his house on Oleander Street. Tall. Impossibly thin. Its limbs bent at joints that shouldn't exist. And it moved with a strange gliding gait that made David's stomach turn. As it passed under the streetlight, David saw that it wasn't walking on the sidewalk, it was floating 3 inches above it. The thing stopped at the Hendersons' house next door. It stood there for a moment, Its head, if that elongated shape, could be called a head tilting back and forth like it was listening. Or counting. Then, it moved on to the next house. Time snapped back at 12:14 a.m. 7 minutes. The TV blared back to life. The refrigerator hummed. And David's whiskey started moving again. He spilled half of it down his shirt. He told himself it was the alcohol, a hallucination, stress from the divorce. But the next night at 12:07, time froze again. And the things came back. This time, David was ready. He'd positioned himself at the window with the lights off, watching the street. At 12:07 exactly, everything stopped a car, mid-drive down the street. A cat, frozen mid-leap in the Patel's yard across the street. Then they emerged from the darkness at the end of Oleander Street. There were 3 of them tonight. The same impossible figures, moving in that gliding, jointless way. They split up, each taking a different house. David watched as one of them approached the Patel's place. It stood at the front door for exactly 30 seconds. David counted, then moved to the next house, the Henderson house. 30 seconds. David's house was next. His breath came short and fast, fogging the window. He wanted to run, to hide, but something kept him rooted there. Some deep, primal part of his brain that knew movement would be worse. The thing stopped at his front door. Up close, David could see it wasn't wearing clothes. Its body was its covering. A smooth, dark surface that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Where its face should be, there was only a blank oval with a single vertical line down the center, like a closed eye. Or a mouth. It stood there. 30 seconds. David counted every one, his fingernails digging into his palms. Then it moved on. The Wilsons' house. 30 seconds. At 12:14, time resumed. The car continued down the street. The cat completed its leap. David threw up in his kitchen sink. He spent the next day researching. Town records. Local history. He called the library, claiming to be writing a book about Millbrook's past. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, was helpful in that bored way librarians get when someone actually wants to use the library. Oleander Street, she said. Oh, that's one of the oldest streets in town. Been there since 1897. Any unusual history? Accidents? Deaths? Anything strange? A pause. Well, there was the children's home, burned down in 1923. 17 children died. They say the headmistress used to count them every night at 7 minutes past midnight, some sort of bed check. After the fire, people claimed to hear counting in the ruins. But you know how ghost stories are. David knew. That night, he tried to stay awake past midnight. He made coffee, strong and black. He walked circles in his living room, but his body betrayed him the exhaustion of 3 weeks of bad sleep caught up, and he dozed off in his chair at 11:47. He woke at 12:07 to frozen time, and the things were in his house. David couldn't move. Sleep paralysis, some rational part of his brain suggested. But he knew better. This was something else. The things had gotten inside somehow, and now 3 of them stood in his living room, arranged in a semicircle around his chair. They were counting. David couldn't hear it, but he could see their heads moving in rhythm, tilting down toward him. Then up, then down again. Counting, counting. Their vertical slits opening slightly, revealing darkness inside, not mouths, not eyes, but something else. Passages that led somewhere David's mind couldn't comprehend. One of them reached out with its too long arm. The limb extended further than should be possible, crossing the space between them. Its hand, 3 fingers, impossibly slender, touched David's forehead. Cold. So cold, it burned. Images flooded David's mind. The children's home burning. 17 small faces at the windows. A woman in a long dress standing outside. Her mouth moving. Counting. Always counting. Making sure her children were all accounted for as the building burned. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then darkness. Years of darkness. The children becoming something else in the burned ruins. Learning to move in the spaces between seconds. Learning to count houses instead of faces. Looking for something. Searching for. Time snapped back. The things were gone. But David's forehead still burned with cold. And he could smell smoke. Old smoke. Smoke from a fire that had burned 100 years ago. He ran from his house, got in his car, and drove to a motel on the highway, as far from Oleander Street as he could get without leaving town. He checked in, paced the room, watched the clock. At 12:07, time froze in the motel too. He was still in Millbrook, still in their territory. The things appeared outside his motel window. More of them now. 5, 6, maybe more in the darkness beyond the parking lot lights. All of them standing still, their blank faces turned toward his room. Counting. David understood then. They weren't counting houses anymore. They were counting him. Every night, they marked him, the way the headmistress had marked her children, making sure he was accounted for. The question was, what happened when they finished counting? He found out over the next 3 weeks. Every night at 12:07, time froze. Every night, the things came closer. They no longer stayed outside. They walked through walls, through doors, through any barrier David tried to create. They stood around him, counting in their silent way, their vertical slits opening wider each time, revealing more of that impossible darkness inside. And David began to change. It started with the cold. That burning cold spread from his forehead down through his body. His joints began to hurt, bending in ways they shouldn't. His reflection in the mirror looked wrong, his proportions slightly off, his limbs a little too long. On the 21st night, David stood in his apartment he'd moved 4 times, trying to escape. But they always found him at 12:07 and watched the clock tick toward midnight. He wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had burned away, replaced by a strange understanding. He counted the seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time froze at 12:07. The things came. 17 of them tonight, he counted. 17 children who had burned and learned to live in the frozen moments. 17 lost souls who needed someone to count them, to remember them, to mark their existence. The headmistress had done it in life. Now they needed someone to do it in death. David opened his mouth and felt the words come not in his voice, but in something older, colder. 1. The first thing tilted its head, acknowledging. 2. The second. David counted all 17. As he spoke each number, he felt himself changing more. His body stretching. His face smoothing. That vertical line appearing down the center, opening to reveal the darkness he now carried inside. At 12:14, time resumed. David stood alone in his apartment, looking at his reflection in the darkened TV screen. He looked almost normal. Almost. But if you looked close, you could see his proportions were wrong. His joints bent at strange angles. And there, down the center of his face, a faint line that hadn't been there before. He had become their counter, their new headmistress. And every night at 12:07, he would mark them, count them, make sure they were all accounted for. The job was his now, forever. Asterisk. If you drive through Millbrook, you might notice a man walking the streets at midnight. He looks normal enough from a distance, though something about his proportions seems off. He stops at each house, standing there for exactly 30 seconds before moving on. Most people don't see him, they're asleep, or they've learned not to look at their clocks at 12:07. But if you're awake, if you're watching, you'll see him counting, always counting, making sure everyone is accounted for. And if he stops at your house for longer than 30 seconds, if he tilts his head and that vertical line down his face begins to open, well, they're always looking for a new counter. The old ones don't last forever. 17 children need someone to mark their existence every night. 7 minutes. Every night. forever. And the count must go on. Asterisk. Ryan Costa found the window on a Saturday afternoon while trying to fix a water stain on his bedroom wall. The apartment was a steal $800 a month, in a city where most people paid double that for a closet with delusions of grandeur. The landlord, Mr. Vreeland, had been almost too eager to rent it to him. Previous tenant left in a hurry, he'd said, jingling his keys. Didn't even take his security deposit. His loss. Your gain. Dord. Ryan should have asked more questions. But he was 32, recently divorced, and tired of sleeping on his brother's couch. He'd signed the lease that same day. The water stain appeared 3 months later, a brown bloom spreading across the wall like a Rorschach test. Ryan figured it was a leak from the apartment above. Something simple. He'd patch it, repaint, move on with his life. He started peeling back the wallpaper. It came off in long, brittle strips, releasing a smell of old glue and something else. Something like attic dust and forgotten years. Behind the third layer of wallpaper, Ryan found wood. Not drywall, not plaster. Smooth, painted wood that formed a frame about 4 feet wide and 3 feet tall. He ran his fingers along the edges, feeling the subtle groove where the frame met the wall. It was a window. Someone had covered over a window. Ryan stood back, studying it. The architecture didn't make sense. This wall faced the interior hallway, not outside. There shouldn't be a window here at all, but the frame was real, the wood solid and old beneath his touch. He grabbed a screwdriver and started prying at the edges. The frame came loose after 20 minutes of work, revealing thick plywood nailed over the window itself. Ryan pulled it away, wood squealing against old nails. Dust rained down, making him cough. And there, behind everything, was glass. Dirty glass, covered in decades of grime. But glass, nonetheless. Ryan wiped it with his sleeve, clearing a small circle. He stopped breathing. The window showed his street Harmony Avenue with its line of brownstones and anemic trees. But it was wrong. The cars parked along the curb were old boxy sedans and wagons from the 1982nd. The trees were smaller, younger, and across the street, where the organic market now stood, there was a different building, entirely a pharmacy, with a faded red sign that read, Keller's Drugs. Ryan stepped back, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. It had to be a painting, some kind of mural or trompe-l'oeil. He reached out and tapped the glass. It was cold, real, and when he looked closer, he saw movement, a plastic bag tumbling down the sidewalk. Caught by wind he couldn't feel. What the hell? Ryan whispered. He spent the next hour cleaning the glass, unable to stop himself. The more grime he removed, the clearer the image became. It was definitely his street, but frozen in some past decade. He could see the same brownstone across the way, but the door was painted green instead of black. The iron railings were rustier. Everything looked older and somehow sadder, the way the past always does when you're looking at it from the future. Ryan grabbed his phone and took pictures. Then he called his brother. Mike, you need to come over. I found something weird in my apartment. Weird how? Like black mold weird or like you finally snapped weird? Just come over. Mike arrived an hour later with beer and skepticism. Ryan led him to the bedroom, pointing at the window. Okay, Mike said, studying it. So, you found a window? Congratulations? Look at what it shows. Mike leaned closer, squinting. His expression changed. Is that a painting? I don't think so. Watch. They stood there in silence. After a moment, a car drove past in the window, a brown station wagon that looked like it belonged in a Sears catalog from 1983. Holy shit, Mike said. He reached out to touch the glass, then pulled back like it might burn him. How is this possible? I don't know. Maybe it's a screen. Like a TV. Ryan had considered that. But there were no wires, no power source. And the image was too perfect, too detailed. He could see individual leaves on the younger trees, the texture of the old pharmacy's brick. "I think it's showing the past," Ryan said. Like, actually showing it. This street as it was decades ago. Mike looked at him like he'd suggested they were living in a simulation. "That's not possible." "Yeah, well, neither is this window." They drank the beer and stared at the impossible view. The sun in that other time set slowly, casting long shadows that didn't match the shadows in Ryan's actual bedroom. Eventually, Mike left, promising to research weird window phenomena online, though they both knew he wouldn't find anything. Ryan couldn't sleep that night. He sat in front of the window, watching the past. A few people walked by, their clothes dated, their hair styled in that unmistakable 80 seconds way. He saw a young couple arguing on the corner. A kid on a BMX bike, an old woman with a shopping cart. None of them looked at the window. Why would they? To them, it was just a window in a building. They couldn't see Ryan watching from decades in their future. At 2:17 a.m., someone waved at him. Ryan's blood turned to ice water. The man stood directly across the street, right in front of where Keller's drugs would eventually become an organic market. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. His face was shadowed. But Ryan could see he was looking directly at the window, directly at Ryan. The man raised his hand, waved. Not a friendly wave, slow, deliberate. Then he pointed at Ryan. Ryan scrambled backward, knocking over his chair. His rational mind screamed that it was impossible, that people in the past couldn't see into the future, that this was all some kind of elaborate trick. But the man kept pointing. After a moment, he lowered his hand and walked away, disappearing around the corner. Ryan didn't go near the window for the rest of the night. The next morning, in the clear light of day, Ryan convinced himself he'd imagined it. Exhaustion, stress, the mind playing tricks. He'd been staring at the window for hours. Of course he'd started seeing things, but that night, the man came back. Same spot, same dark jacket. This time he didn't just wave, he held up a piece of cardboard with something written on it. Ryan's hands shook as he leaned closer to read it. In messy handwriting, "Can you see me?" Ryan's throat went dry. Slowly, he nodded. The man in the past smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. He flipped the cardboard over. "Good. Don't let it happen again. Don't let what happened?" Ryan said aloud, knowing the man couldn't hear him. The man pulled out what looked like a marker and wrote on the cardboard again. When he held it up, Ryan felt his stomach drop. The fire. Ryan stepped back from the window. Fire? What fire? He grabbed his laptop and started searching. Harmony Avenue fire. 1,980 seconds building fire. Keller's drugs fire. Nothing came up. No news articles, no records. Whatever the man was talking about hadn't happened, or hadn't been reported. For the next 3 nights, Ryan avoided the window. He hung a sheet over it, tried to ignore it, but he could feel it there, behind the fabric. A portal to the past, and someone on the other side was trying to tell him something. On the 4th night, Ryan couldn't take it anymore. He pulled down the sheet. The man was there, waiting. He looked different now, tired, desperate. He held up new signs. Tenant before you. Couldn't stop it. Then, March 15, th. This building. Ryan checked his phone. March 15th was in 3 days. You have to get out. The next sign read. Who are you? Ryan shouted at the window, even though he knew it was useless. The man wrote something else, but his hands were shaking so badly, Ryan could barely read it. I'm you. Ryan laughed. It came out high and hysterical. Bullshit. That's impossible. The man in the past put down his cardboard. He stepped closer to a streetlight, and for the first time, Ryan got a clear look at his face. The resemblance wasn't perfect. The man was older, his hair thinner, his face more lined. But the bone structure was the same. The nose, the eyes. It was like looking at himself in 20 years. Ryan's knees went weak. He sat down hard on his bedroom floor. The man his older self was writing again. When he held up the sign, his hands were steady. The fire starts in your apartment. March 15th, 11:34 p.m. You don't wake up. Neither does anyone else in the building. Ryan felt cold sweat running down his back. Why didn't you warn yourself when you lived here? His older self anticipated the question. He flipped the cardboard. He did. The May of my time didn't listen. Thought he was crazy. Now I'm stuck here, watching it happen again. Stuck where? Ryan whispered. His last sign. In the space between. Watching every version try to change it. You're the 7th. Ryan stood up, his mind racing. Fine, I'll leave. I'll get out before March 15th. His older self shook his head frantically. He wrote quickly, the cardboard shaking. Not enough. You'll come back. You always come back. You have to find the source. What source? What are you talking about? Apartment 1A, Vreeland. Ryan knew apartment 1 Ampere. That was the landlord's unit. The one Mr. Vreeland kept locked. He'd said he used it for storage. His older self was writing one more message. When he held it up, Ryan's blood froze. He starts the fire. Insurance money. He's done it before. He'll do it again. Until someone stops him. The next day, Ryan called the police. They were polite, but dismissive. When he told them his landlord might be planning to commit arson. Without evidence, there was nothing they could do. Certainly nothing based on messages from a time-traveling window. Ryan tried the fire marshal's office. Same result. With 2 days until March 15th, Ryan knew he had to take matters into his own hands. He picked the lock on apartment 1 Ampere while Vreeland was out. Inside, he found exactly what his older self had warned him about. Gasoline cans, rags, insurance documents, and something else, newspaper clippings. 5 different building fires over the past 15 years, all owned by Vreeland. All ruled accidental. All paying out substantial insurance claims. Ryan took pictures of everything. Then he called Mike. I need you to help me move all my stuff out today. Right now. Ryan, what's going on? I'll explain later. Just trust me. They cleared out Ryan's apartment in 6 hours. Ryan left his door unlocked. His windows open. Then he called the police again, this time with photographic evidence and a tip that Vreeland had been seen entering apartment 1 Ampere with gasoline cans. The police took it seriously this time. They arrested Vreeland that afternoon, March 14th. 1 day before the fire was supposed to happen. That night, Ryan couldn't help himself. He drove back to the building and looked up at his old bedroom window. For a moment, he thought about going inside, checking the window one last time, but something made him stay in his car. A feeling, a sense that if he went back inside, even for a minute, he might not come out again. At exactly 11:34 p.m., the time his older self had warned him about, Ryan saw smoke. It was coming from the ground floor, from apartment 1 Ampere. The police had searched it but hadn't removed the gasoline cans. And Vreeland, before being taken away, had set a timer. The fire trucks arrived within minutes. The building didn't burn down. The flames were contained to the first floor. But it was close. If people had been sleeping, if the alarms hadn't worked, if the fire had gotten to the upper floors. Ryan understood then what his older self had been trying to tell him. In every other timeline, Ryan had been asleep when it happened. He died without knowing why. And somehow, some version of him had gotten stuck in that space between watching through the window, trying to warn each new version of himself, breaking the cycle. 2 weeks later, after giving his statement to the police and the fire marshal, Ryan went back to the building one last time. The landlord had given him permission to collect anything he'd missed. He went to his old bedroom. The window was still there, still uncovered. The view showed Harmony Avenue as it was now the organic market. The black door on the brownstone, the mature trees. Present day. But as Ryan turned to leave, he caught movement in the glass. He looked back. His older self stood in the window, now not outside on the street, but inside the room, looking out at Ryan through the glass. He was smiling. A real smile this time. Tired, but relieved. He held up one last sign. Thank you. Then he faded, becoming transparent. Then nothing. The window showed only Ryan's reflection now. Just a normal window, showing nothing but glass and light. Ryan sealed it up that afternoon. He plastered over it, painted the wall, made sure no one would find it again. Some windows aren't meant to be opened. Some views of the past should stay buried. But sometimes, just sometimes, the past reaches forward to save the future. And sometimes it works. Asterisk. The building on Harmony Avenue still stands. Ryan Costa lives across town now, in a new apartment with no mysterious windows. But on March 15th every year, he drives past his old building and looks up at that bedroom window. It's been covered over, sealed up behind new wallpaper. But sometimes, just sometimes, in the right light, if you look from the right angle, you can see a shadow behind the glass. A figure, standing watch, making sure the cycle stays broken, making sure the fire never comes again. Asterisk. Tommy Brennan was 9 years old when he first heard his own voice crying for help. It happened on a Tuesday after school. One of those May afternoons when the sky can't decide between sun and rain. Tommy's mom had sent him outside to play because she needed just 15 minutes of peace to finish her work call. She worked from home now, which meant Tommy saw her more but talked to her less. He'd been riding his bike up and down Oakwood Lane, popping wheelies in front of the Hendersons' house, when he heard it. Crying, not like a baby crying or even a kid who'd scraped his knee. This was different. Desperate. The kind of crying that came from somewhere deep and dark and hopeless. Tommy stopped his bike, one sneaker scraping against the pavement. The sound was coming from the storm drain at the end of the street, right where Oakwood Lane dead-ended into the woods. The drain was big, one of those old concrete ones with rusty iron bars across the opening. Tommy's dad had told him never to go near it. Kids used to play in the drainage tunnels, his dad had said. Back in the 80 seconds, 3 of them got stuck when a flash flood came. They never found the bodies. Tommy had asked if that was true or just a story to scare him. His dad had smiled in that way adults do when they're not really answering. But Tommy wasn't thinking about his dad's warning now. He was thinking about whoever was crying down there. He dropped his bike on the grass and walked closer. Hello? His voice came out smaller than he wanted. The crying stopped. Tommy's heart beat faster. He crept forward until he was right at the edge of the drain. The bars were spaced about 6 inches apart, wide enough to see through, but too narrow to fit through. Beyond them was darkness and the smell of wet concrete and something else. Something rotten, like the garbage bag his mom had forgotten to take out last summer. Is someone down there? Tommy called. Silence. Then, from deep in the tunnel, help me. It was a kid's voice. Tommy's age, maybe a little older. Are you stuck? Tommy gripped the iron bars. They were cold and rough with rust. Should I get my mom? No. The voice came closer now, echoing up from the darkness. No, don't leave. Please don't leave me alone again. Tommy could hear movement now, splashing. Someone was coming up through the water in the tunnel. I'm not supposed to be near the drain, Tommy said. But he didn't move away. My dad says it's dangerous. Your dad. The voice was right below him now, just beyond where the light reached. Your dad doesn't know anything about dangerous. Not yet. Something about the way the voice said, yet, made Tommy's stomach feel cold. What's your name? Tommy asked. A pause, then, Tommy. That's my name. I know. A hand reached up from the darkness, gripping one of the iron bars. It was pale, covered in something dark and wet. The fingers were thin, too thin, like they hadn't eaten in a long time. Come closer, the voice said. I need to see the sundae just for a minute. Please. Tommy knew he should run. Every instinct his 9-year-old brain possessed was screaming at him to get on his bike and pedal home as fast as he could. But something kept him frozen there. Curiosity. Or maybe something else, that weird pull you feel when you know something is wrong but you can't stop staring. He leaned down, peering through the bars. A face emerged from the shadows. Tommy screamed. It was his face. Older, maybe 15 or 16, but definitely his face. Same brown eyes. Same crooked front tooth from when he'd fallen off the monkey bars in first grade. Same small scar on his chin from the chicken pox. But this version was wrong. The skin was gray and wet. The eyes were sunken and desperate. And there was something around the neck. A chain. Thick and rusted. Disappearing back into the darkness. "Don't scream," the older Tommy begged. "Please. You have to listen to me. You have to—" The chain went taut. The older Tommy's eyes went wide with terror. "No," he whispered. "No. Not yet. I haven't told him." Something pulled. Hard. The older Tommy's hands scrabbled at the bars, his fingernails scraping against the iron, leaving dark streaks. "Don't go to the woods," he screamed as he was dragged backward. "In 6 years, when Jake Henderson dares you to explore the old drainage tunnels, don't go. Stay away from—" The voice cut off with a splash. Then silence. Tommy stood there, shaking, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. He waited for the crying to start again, for the face to reappear, for anything. Nothing. He ran home and didn't stop until he was inside his house, with the door locked behind him. "Tommy?" His mom came out of her office holding her phone. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Tommy opened his mouth to tell her everything. About the voice, the crying, the face that was his face, but older. And trapped. And terrified. But then, he stopped. Adults never believed kids about this stuff. In every story Tommy had ever read, every movie he'd ever watched, kids tried to warn the grown-ups. And the grown-ups just thought they had big imaginations. They'd tell him he'd been dreaming or watching too much TV. Worse, they might forbid him from riding his bike on Oakwood Lane. And that was his favorite street. "Nothing," Tommy said. "Just thought I saw a snake." His mom smiled and went back to her call. That night, Tommy lay in bed and thought about what the older version of himself had said. 6 years. A dare from Jake Henderson. The old drainage tunnels. He could avoid that. It would be easy. In 6 years, when he was 15, if Jake Henderson dared him to go into the tunnels, he'd just say no. Problem solved. Tommy almost convinced himself it would be that simple. The crying came back the next day. And the day after that, every afternoon, Tommy would hear it as he rode past the drain. Sometimes he'd stop, lean down, call into the darkness. But the older Tommy never showed himself again. Just that desperate echoing cry that made Tommy's chest hurt. After a week, Tommy's mom noticed. "You've been quiet lately," she said over dinner. "Everything okay at school?" Tommy pushed his peas around his plate. "Mom, do you believe in time travel?" His dad laughed. "Been watching sci-fi movies?" "No, What if you could see yourself from the future? Would you believe what they told you?" His parents exchanged that look. The one adults give each other when they think a kid is going through a phase. "I think," his mom said carefully, "that we can't know the future. All we can do is make good choices now." It wasn't the answer Tommy wanted, but it was the only one he was going to get. The crying continued for 3 weeks. Then it stopped. Tommy waited by the drain for an hour that day, calling into the darkness, but nothing answered. Eventually, he went home, feeling a weird mixture of relief and loss. Life went on. Tommy got older. 5th grade, then 6th, then 7th. He mostly forgot about the voice in the drain. The memory became fuzzy, dreamlike. The way childhood things do when you're trying to become a teenager. By the time Tommy was 14, Oakwood Lane had been repaved, and the old storm drain had been sealed up with concrete. The city had finally modernized the drainage system. Tommy's dad said it was about time those old tunnels were a death trap. Tommy's 15th birthday came on a Saturday in May. Jake Henderson threw a party at his house because Jake's parents were out of town, and Jake thought that made him cool. "Dude," Jake said, pulling Tommy aside while everyone else was in the living room playing video games. "I found something insane. The old drainage tunnels, there's an access point in the woods behind my house. The city didn't seal all of them." Tommy felt something cold in his stomach. So we should explore them. Everyone says they're haunted. Imagine how cool we'd look if we went down there and filmed it. Tommy shook his head. That's stupid and dangerous. Come on, don't be a baby. It's your birthday. Live a little. And here it was. 6 years later, almost to the day. The exact scenario the older Tommy had warned him about. Just say no. Tommy thought. Walk away. You know what happens if you go. But then Jake was calling the other guys over, telling them about the tunnels, and everyone was looking at Tommy, waiting to see if he'd back out. And Tommy was 15 now, not 9. He didn't believe in voices from drains and alternate versions of himself. That had been a dream. A kid's overactive imagination. Fine, Tommy heard himself say. Let's do it. The woods behind Jake's house were thick with underbrush and the musty smell of decay. The access point was exactly where Jake said it would be, a concrete cylinder sticking up from the ground, its metal cover pushed aside. Ladies first, Jake said, grinning at Tommy. Tommy looked down into the darkness. He could hear water running somewhere below. His hands were shaking. I don't think, he started, but Jake was already climbing down the rusty ladder, and the other guys were watching, and Tommy's 15-year-old pride wouldn't let him be the one who chickened out. He climbed down. The tunnel was worse than he'd imagined. Low ceiling, knee-deep water, darkness so complete that their phone flashlights barely made a dent. The walls were covered in slime, and things floated in the water, things Tommy tried not to look at too closely. This is awesome, Jake said. But his voice had an edge of fear now. They walked for maybe 10 minutes, hunched over, splashing through the filthy water. Tommy kept thinking about turning back, kept remembering that crying voice from 6 years ago. Then Jake stopped. Guys, he whispered. Do you hear that? Tommy heard it. Crying. The same desperate, hopeless crying he'd heard when he was 9. It's coming from up ahead, one of the other guys said. They moved forward, even though everything in Tommy's body was screaming at him to run. Around a bend in the tunnel, they found a wider chamber. The water was deeper here, almost chest-high. And in the center of the chamber, chained to a metal grate, was a boy. He looked about 15. Pale, soaked, shivering. His eyes were wild with fear and something else, recognition. Tommy? The boy said. Oh God, you came. You actually came. Tommy's blood turned to ice. It was his voice. His face. Just like 6 years ago. But now, they were the same age. What the hell? Jake breathed. The chained Tommy looked at Jake, then back at Tommy. You have to get out. All of you. It's coming. It always comes when... The water rippled. Something was moving beneath the surface. Something big. Run! The chained Tommy screamed, but it was too late. The water exploded upward, and Tommy saw it, a thing made of shadow and hunger, with too many arms and a mouth that shouldn't exist. It grabbed Jake first, pulling him under before he could even scream. Tommy ran. He didn't remember the running, not really. Just flashes, the tunnel walls flying past, water splashing, screams behind him, his lungs burning, his legs pumping. He climbed out of that access point and kept running until he reached Jake's house, until he could call 911, until the adults came with their flashlights and their questions. They searched the tunnels for 3 days. They found Jake and the other 2 boys eventually. The official report said they'd drowned, gotten disoriented in the tunnels, panicked. They never found the other Tommy, the chained one. Because Tommy knew had known since he was 9 years old that he was still down there. The truth came to him slowly, over the next few weeks, as he lay awake in his bed trying not to think about what he'd seen. Time wasn't a line. It was a loop. The Tommy chained in the tunnels wasn't from another timeline. He was Tommy. The Tommy who would exist if Tommy went into the tunnels. By escaping, by surviving. Tommy had created two versions of himself. The one who got away, and the one who didn't. And the one who didn't was trapped down there, watching every version of himself approach the same choice. Watching the loop repeat. That's why he'd been crying at the drain when Tommy was 9. He'd been trying to warn his younger self for years, maybe decades. Watching time loop back on itself, warning every version of himself. Hoping one of them would listen. Tommy had listened. He'd remembered the warning. He'd known exactly what would happen. And he'd gone anyway. 3 months later, Tommy's mom asked him why he'd stopped riding his bike. "I just don't feel like it," he said. What he didn't say was that he couldn't go past that sealed drain on Oakwood Lane without hearing it. The crying. His own voice, echoing up through concrete and time, begging for a rescue that would never come. Sometimes, late at night, Tommy thought about what he could have done differently. He could have been stronger at Jake's party. Could have said no, and meant it. Could have told the truth about what he'd seen when he was 9, but he hadn't. And now, there was another him down there in the dark. Would always be another him down there, living out the consequence of a choice he'd made at 15. The voice in the drain had been right about everything, except one thing. It hadn't said that saving yourself meant leaving another version of you behind. It hadn't said that living with what you'd done would be its own kind of drowning. Tommy was 16 now. He didn't ride his bike on Oakwood Lane anymore. Didn't go near storm drains. Didn't sleep well. And on rainy nights, when the water was high and the drains were flowing, he could swear he heard it his own voice, crying out from somewhere beneath the streets, begging not to be pulled back down into the dark, begging not to be forgotten, but Tommy couldn't save him. Couldn't even visit. Because he knew if he got too close to any drain, if he leaned down to look, he might see that desperate face looking back. Might see the chain around his own neck, might see the thing in the water waiting, might realize that he wasn't the version who escaped after all. Asterisk. There's a storm drain on Oakwood Lane that was sealed in 2019. Sometimes, after heavy rain, people say they hear crying coming from beneath the concrete. The city has checked it twice both times, finding nothing but water and darkness. But the sound continues. And if you listen closely on quiet nights, you might hear a voice calling out a name. The same name. Over and over. Trying to warn someone. Trying to save someone. Trying to reach a version of himself that might still have a chance. But time is a loop. And some choices, once made, echo forever. Down in the dark, where the water flows, where the crying never stops. Asterisk. Marcus Webb first noticed the girl during the Tuesday evening news. He was eating leftover Chinese food straight from the container, half watching Channel 7's broadcast while scrolling through his phone. Lauren Matthews, the anchor he'd been watching for 3 years, was talking about a water main break downtown. Standard stuff. Marcus wasn't really paying attention. Then, something made him look up. There was a little girl standing behind Lauren's desk. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. Wearing what looked like a white nightgown. Her hair hung straight and dark around her pale face. She just stood there, perfectly still, while Lauren continued reading the news. Marcus blinked. The girl was still there. "What the hell?" he muttered, sitting up straighter. The camera angle changed, switching to the co-anchor, David Chen. The girl was behind him too, in the exact same position, standing motionless, arms at her sides. As if she'd somehow moved from one side of the studio to the other in an instant. Marcus fumbled for the remote, rewinding his DVR. He watched the transition again. The girl was behind Lauren. Then the cut happened. Then she was behind David. No movement. Just there. The broadcast went to commercial. Marcus sat there, his lo mein forgotten, heart beating a little faster than it should be. He told himself it was a prank. Maybe some tech-savvy intern had hacked the broadcast. Or it was a glitch, an image overlay from another channel bleeding through. Things like that happened, right? The news came back on. Weather segment. Marcus leaned forward. The girl was standing behind the meteorologist now, her face expressionless. Jake Morrison pointed at his green screen, talking about a cold front coming in from Canada, completely oblivious to the child standing 6 feet behind him. Marcus grabbed his phone and pulled up Channel 7's live stream. Same broadcast. Slight delay. There was Jake, gesturing at his weather maps. No girl. Marcus looked back at his TV. She was there, clear as day. Okay. Marcus said aloud to his empty apartment. Okay. You're seeing things. You need sleep. He worked from home as a software developer, had been pulling 70-hour weeks for the past month trying to meet a deadline. Sleep deprivation did weird things to the brain. He'd read about that. Hallucinations, paranoia, visual distortions. That had to be it. Marcus turned off the TV and went to bed early. But sleep wouldn't come. He kept seeing that pale face, those dark eyes, that white nightgown, the way she stood so perfectly still while the news anchors moved and talked and laughed, never once acknowledging her presence. The next night, Marcus told himself he wouldn't watch Channel 7. He'd stream something instead. Maybe catch up on that show everyone kept recommending. But at 6 o'clock, his hand reached for the remote almost on its own. Channel 7 came on. Lauren Matthews smiled at the camera. Good evening. Our top story tonight. The girl was there, right behind Lauren, in the same spot as yesterday. Same white nightgown. Same expressionless face. Marcus's mouth went dry. He watched the entire broadcast. Every segment, every camera angle. The girl was always there, always in frame, always perfectly still, standing behind the anchors during the news, behind the reporters during the field segments, which should have been impossible because those were filmed on location, behind the sports guy, the entertainment correspondent. Everyone. During commercial breaks, Marcus checked the live stream on his phone again. No girl. He called up Channel 7's website and watched their archived broadcasts from last week. Nothing. Just normal news. She was only visible on his TV. Marcus took a picture of his screen with his phone. When he looked at the photo, the girl was just a blur, a white smudge that could have been anything. He tried recording a video. Same thing. The moment the image passed through his phone's camera, she became indistinct, impossible to focus on. But when he looked directly at the TV screen, she was crystal clear. This isn't real, Marcus told himself. This is stress. This is your brain breaking down. He made an appointment with his doctor for next week. In the meantime, he'd just stop watching TV. Simple, except he couldn't stop. Every night at 6, he found himself turning on Channel 7. And every night, the girl was there. Sometimes she was in the background. Sometimes she was closer, standing right next to the anchors. Once, during a weather report, she was so close to Jake Morrison that Marcus could see the detail in her nightgown, small flowers embroidered around the collar. Jake had no idea she was there. Nobody did. On Friday night, 1 week after Marcus first saw her, something changed. The girl moved. Not much. Just her head, tilting slightly to the left, while Lauren Matthews discussed a city council meeting. It was such a small movement that Marcus almost missed it. But his whole body went cold when he saw it. She'd been perfectly frozen for 5 days straight, and now she was moving. Marcus's hands were shaking. He grabbed his phone, ready to call someone, anyone. But who would he call? Hey, there's a ghost girl on my TV that only I can see, and she just moved her head? They'd think he was losing his mind. Maybe he was. The weekend was torture. Marcus barely left his apartment. He kept checking the TV, flipping to Channel 7, watching for the girl. She was always there, and she kept moving more small movements at first. A shift of her shoulders, her hands slowly rising to hang loose at her sides, instead of pressed against her legs. By Sunday night, she was swaying slightly, like a tree in a gentle wind. Monday morning, Marcus called in sick to work. He couldn't focus, couldn't code, couldn't do anything but think about the girl on Channel 7. He tried other channels. CNN, Fox, local networks. She wasn't on any of them. Only Channel 7, only his apartment's TV. That afternoon, he did something desperate. He called Channel 7's main number. "Hi," he said when someone answered. "I have a question about your broadcasts. Have you noticed anything unusual lately? In your studio?" The receptionist sounded confused. "Unusual how? Like, has anyone seen a girl? A young girl in a white dress?" A pause. "Sir, are you reporting a missing child?" "No, I never mind. Sorry." He hung up, feeling stupid and scared and more alone than he'd felt in years. That night, Monday, exactly 1 week after he'd first seen her, Marcus forced himself to watch Channel 7 again. He had to know, had to see if things would get worse or if maybe, just maybe, the girl would be gone. 6 o'clock. The broadcast started. Lauren Matthews appeared on screen with her professional smile and perfect hair. The girl was standing directly beside Lauren now. Not behind her. Beside her. At the desk. Close enough to touch. Marcus's breath caught in his throat, and then the girl turned her head. Slowly, deliberately, she turned away from the camera. Turned toward Lauren. Marcus watched in horror as the girl's lips moved, like she was whispering something. Lauren kept reading the news, oblivious. The girl turned back toward the camera and looked directly at Marcus, not at the camera. At Marcus. He could feel it, that lock of eye contact that happens when someone's really seeing you. Her eyes found his through the screen, through the distance, through whatever impossible barrier separated them. Her lips moved again. Marcus couldn't hear her, but he could read lips well enough. "I see you." He grabbed the remote and turned off the TV. His hands were shaking so badly, he dropped the remote twice. His apartment felt too small. Suddenly, too quiet. He grabbed his keys and his phone and ran outside. He walked for hours through his neighborhood in downtown Seattle, trying to convince himself he'd imagined it, trying to rationalize it away. But he couldn't shake the memory of those eyes locking onto his, the way her lips had formed those words, "I see you." When Marcus finally came home around midnight, exhausted and scared and still not sure what to do, he made a decision. He'd record Channel 7's broadcast tomorrow. Maybe if he recorded it with a real camera instead of his phone, he'd be able to show someone. Get proof. Show that he wasn't crazy. He owned a decent camcorder, something he'd bought years ago to record coding tutorials he'd never made. He set it up on a tripod, pointed at the TV, and waited for Tuesday evening's broadcast. 6 o'clock came. Channel 7's theme music played. Lauren Matthews appeared. The girl was standing behind the anchor desk again, but closer to the camera now. Close enough that Marcus could see her face clearly. She looked like any normal child, except for her eyes. There was something wrong with her eyes. They were too dark, too hollow. Like they went back further than eyes should go. Marcus hit record on the camcorder. The girl's head moved. Slowly, she looked away from Lauren, away from the studio. She looked directly at the camera, at Marcus's TV camera recording the broadcast. At Marcus, her lips moved. Marcus leaned forward, reading them. "I'm coming through." The TV flickered. Just for a second, the image distorted, rippling like water. When it stabilized, the girl was closer to the camera. Much closer. Her face filled half the screen, pale and expressionless, those hollow eyes staring out. Marcus scrambled backward, knocking over his chair. The TV flickered again. The girl was closer still. The angle was wrong now. She wasn't standing in the studio anymore. She was inside the TV somehow, pressed up against the screen from the inside. Her face distorted slightly by the curve of the glass. Her hand appeared, pressing flat against the screen from within. "No," Marcus whispered. "No, no, no." The girl's lips moved again. And this time, Marcus heard her voice. It didn't come from the TV speakers. It came from behind him. Soft. Childlike. Terrible. "I'm in your house now." Marcus spun around. His apartment was empty. But he could feel her presence like a cold spot in the air. Like someone had opened a window in winter and let the death of things blow in. He ran for the door. His hand was on the knob when every TV in the building turned on at once. He could hear them through the walls, all tuned to Channel 7, all at maximum volume. Lauren Matthews' voice echoed through the building, reading the news, her words overlapping and distorting into a nightmare chorus. Marcus yanked open the door and stopped. The girl was standing in the hallway, not on a screen, not in a broadcast. Right there in front of him, solid and real and impossible. Her white nightgown hung loose around her thin frame. Her feet were bare on the carpet. Her eyes, those hollow, wrong eyes fixed on his. "You watched," she said. Her voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. "Every night. You watched me. You let me in. I don't understand." Marcus managed. His voice cracked. "What do you want?" The girl tilted her head. The same way she'd done on TV. "I've been waiting so long. In the signal. In the broadcast. Waiting for someone to really see me. To watch long enough. To let me through." "Through from where?" She smiled then. It was the worst thing Marcus had ever seen, a child smile that held nothing childlike in it. From where all the lost signals go. All the dead air. All the broadcasts that never ended. That keep playing in the empty spaces between channels. "I've been there so long, alone in the static, but you saw me, you watched me, and now..." She took a step forward. Marcus pressed back against the doorframe. "Now I'm here, and you'll take my place." "What?" The girl's hand reached out, and where her fingers touched his chest, Marcus felt cold, spread through him like ice water in his veins. "Someone has to be in the signal," she whispered. "Someone has to stand in the background, waiting. That's the rule. I waited for 30 years. Now it's your turn." Marcus tried to run, tried to push past her, but his body wouldn't move. The cold was spreading, turning him numb, turning him incorporeal. He looked down and saw his hands becoming transparent, flickering like a bad TV signal. "No," he gasped. "Please." But the girl was already walking away, down the hall, her bare feet silent on the carpet. She looked back once, and Marcus saw that her eyes were different now. Fuller. More alive. Like she'd taken something from him to fill the hollowness inside her. "Thank you," she said, "for watching." Then she was gone, and Marcus was, standing in a television studio he'd never been to, behind a news desk, where Lauren Matthews sat reading from a teleprompter. She couldn't see him. Nobody could see him. He was behind them, beside them, part of the broadcast but separate from it, trapped in the signal, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything but stand there and wait for someone else to start watching, stand there and hope that somewhere, someone would turn on Channel 7 and really see him. Keep watching night after night. Let him in the way he'd let the girl in. Stand there and count the days. The weeks. The years. Marcus tried to scream, but no sound came out. He was in the signal now, part of the broadcast. And he would stand there forever. Or until someone else made the same mistake he'd made. Until someone else watched too long. Until someone else let him through. Asterisk. If you live in Seattle and you watch Channel 7, pay attention to the backgrounds during the evening news. Really look. You might see him there, standing behind the anchors, wearing the same clothes he wore on his last day. Most people don't notice. Their eyes slide right past him, the way your brain automatically filters out unimportant details. But sometimes if you're tired, if you're stressed, if you're watching alone late at night, you'll see him clearly. Standing motionless, staring at the camera, at you. And if you keep watching, if you can't look away, if you find yourself tuning in every night just to see if he's still there, Well, he's waiting. They're always waiting. The ones trapped in the signal, waiting for someone to watch long enough. Waiting for someone to let them through. Waiting to trade places with you. So maybe change the channel. Maybe turn off the TV. Maybe don't look too closely at what stands in the background of your favorite broadcasts. Because once you really see them, once they know you're watching, they can see you too. Asterisk. Derek Chen had been driving for 3 hours when he realized he couldn't remember the last car he'd passed. Interstate 72 stretched out before him like a ribbon of black glass under the November moon. He'd taken this route 100 times from Chicago back to his hometown of Millfield, Indiana, but tonight it felt different. Longer. Emptier. Like the highway had somehow stretched while he wasn't paying attention. His phone had died an hour ago. The radio offered nothing but static. Derek drove in silence, watching the broken white lines disappear beneath his Honda like a hypnotic pulse. He was thinking about Sarah. 12 years. 12 years since he'd left Millfield after the accident. 12 years since he'd avoided this drive, avoided this town, avoided everything that reminded him of that night. But his mother's funeral was tomorrow, and some obligations you couldn't escape, no matter how far you ran. The toll booth appeared suddenly, materializing out of the darkness like it had been waiting for him. Derek's foot moved to the brake instinctively. That was wrong. There were no toll booths on this stretch of I-72. He'd driven it countless times before the accident. This was a free highway, had been for decades, but there it was. A small concrete structure sitting alone in the center of the empty road. A single yellow light glowing above it. No signs, no warnings. Just the booth and a wooden barrier arm stretched across both lanes. Derek slowed to a stop. His headlights illuminated the booth, and he could see someone inside, a figure sitting in the small space, silhouetted against the dim interior light. He rolled down his window. November air rushed in, carrying the smell of decay and wet leaves. "Hello?" Derek called out. The figure moved, leaning forward into the light. It was a man, maybe 60, with gray hair and a face that might have been kind once. He wore what looked like an old toll operator's uniform, the kind Derek had seen in photos from the 70 seconds. "Evening," the operator said. His voice was soft, tired. "Heading home?" Yeah, Millfield." Derek glanced at his dashboard, then back at the booth. "I didn't know there was a toll here now." "Oh, there's always been a toll," the operator said. "For this particular road, this particular journey." Something in the way he said it made Derek's skin prickle. "How much?" Derek asked, reaching for his wallet. The operator waved his hand dismissively. "Already paid." "What? I just got here." "You paid 12 years ago." November 17th, 2013. Around 11:47 p.m. The operator consulted something Derek couldn't see. Yes. All settled. Derek's hands tightened on the steering wheel. November 17th, 2013. The night of the accident. The night Sarah— "That's not funny," Derek said, his voice harder now. "I don't know what kind of sick joke this is, but no joke." The operator pulled out a photograph and held it up to the window. "See? You already came through." Derek leaned forward, squinting at the photo. It was him. Younger 23 instead of 35, but definitely him. He was sitting in a car. This same Honda, actually. Looking straight at the camera. But the expression on his face was wrong. His eyes were wide, terrified. And there was something dark splattered across his shirt and the windshield behind him. "Blood. Where did you get that?" Derek whispered. "Took it myself. 12 years ago tonight." The operator set the photo on the counter between them. "You came through around midnight. Paid the toll. Kept driving." "That's impossible. There was no toll booth that night. I remember everything about that night." "Do you?" The operator's eyes were sad. "What do you remember?" Derek's mouth was dry. "Sarah and I. We'd been at a party. We got in a fight. About me moving to Chicago. About her wanting to stay in Millfield. I was driving too fast. Not drunk. Just angry. Stupid. His voice cracked. The deer came out of nowhere. I swerved. Lost control. We went off the road. And then Sarah died. I woke up in the hospital 2 days later. Broken ribs. Concussion. But Sarah was dead. Died on impact, they said. The operator nodded slowly. That's the story you tell yourself. The story in the police report. The story everyone believes. Because it's true. Is it? The operator pushed the photograph closer. Look again. Really look. Derek picked up the photo with shaking hands. In the harsh flash of the camera, he could see more details now. The blood on his shirt. The spider web. Crack. In the windshield. And in the passenger seat beside him, empty. The passenger seat was empty. Where's Sarah? Derek asked. In this photo, where is she? That's the question, isn't it? The operator leaned back in his chair. Derek, what do you remember after the crash? Right after. Derek closed his eyes. He'd relived that night 1,000 times, worn the memory smooth like a stone in a river. We went off the road, hit a tree. The airbags deployed. Everything was white and loud, and then quiet. I called Sarah's name. She didn't answer. There was blood. So much blood. I tried to get out. Tried to help her. But I couldn't move. I must have passed out. Next thing I knew, I was in the hospital. No. The operator said gently. Try again. What happened right after the crash? Derek opened his eyes. The operator was watching him with something like pity. Derek frowned. There was something at the edge of the memory. Something he'd never quite been able to grasp. I got out of the car. Yes, I was. Standing on the road. This road. It was dark. Cold. My phone was dead. I couldn't call for help. So I started walking. Looking for someone. A house, another car, anything. And you found this toll booth? The memory clicked into place, sharp and terrible. Derek had walked for what felt like hours. His head was pounding, his vision blurry. And then he'd seen the yellow light. The booth. The operator, this same operator sitting inside. I asked you to call 911, Derek whispered. I told you there'd been an accident. That Sarah needed help. And I told you, the operator said, that help was already on the way. That you'd paid your toll and you could keep going. So you did. You got back in your car, but the car was wrecked. It shouldn't have been drivable, and you drove to the hospital. You told them you'd been in an accident. They treated you, put you in a room, and 2 days later, they told you Sarah was dead. Derek shook his head. No, that doesn't make sense. If I could drive after the crash, why couldn't I drive to get help? Why did I walk? Why did I... He stopped, a horrible realization creeping over him. The police said I was the only one in the car. Yes. They said Sarah's body was thrown from the vehicle. That I must have been confused, in shock, when I thought she was in the passenger seat at the hospital. Derek, the operator's voice was infinitely gentle. Where do you think you are right now? I'm driving home, to Millfield, for my mother's funeral. Your mother died 3 years ago. You went to that funeral. Don't you remember? Derek's hands started to shake. No. She called me last week. She said, but even as he said it, he knew it was wrong. The phone call had been strange. Distant. Like listening to a recording. And when had he last actually seen his mother? 3 years? 5? You paid the toll 12 years ago, the operator said. The night of November 17th, 2013. The toll for this road. The toll everyone pays eventually. What toll? Derek's voice broke. What are you talking about? The operator gestured at the highway stretching out behind the booth, disappearing into darkness. The road you've been on. The one you've been driving for 12 years. The one that goes nowhere because there's nowhere left to go. I don't understand. Derek. The operator pulled out another photograph. This one showed the crash site. The Honda wrapped around a tree, the entire front end crumpled like paper. Emergency lights flashing. Paramedics working on someone too. Someone's on the ground. Sarah wasn't thrown from the car, the operator said quietly. Neither of you were wearing seatbelts. You were both thrown through the windshield. The paramedics tried, but you'd both died before they even arrived. The impact was instant. Painless. If that helps. Derek stared at the photo. At the two bodies on the ground, covered with sheets. At the wreckage that no one could have walked away from. I went to Chicago, he said weakly. I got a job. I have an apartment. I've been living... Have you? The operator's eyes were kind but unrelenting. Think about Chicago, Derek. Really think about it. Your apartment, have you ever had visitors? Your job, do you interact with anyone? Your life for the past 12 years, has anyone actually seen you? Derek opened his mouth to argue. But the words wouldn't come. Because now that he thought about it, his apartment was always empty. His coworkers never wanted to get drinks after work. His family never visited. He'd told himself it was because he was keeping distance, because of the guilt, because he needed space to heal. But the truth was simpler and more terrible. There was no one there to see him, because there was nothing there to see. I'm dead, Derek whispered. Yes, I died 12 years ago, in the crash, with Sarah. Yes, so what is this? Heaven? Hell? Purgatory? The operator shrugged. Call it what you want. I call it the road. Everyone travels it differently. Some people realize quickly. Others take years. Decades. You've been driving the same highway for 12 years, Derek. Driving home but never arriving. Because home isn't a place you can get to anymore. Why didn't you tell me? Derek's voice rose, anger mixing with despair. 12 years ago, when I stopped here the first time, why didn't you tell me I was dead? Would you have believed me? Derek slumped in his seat. No. He wouldn't have. He'd needed to believe he survived. Needed to believe he could escape. Could start over. Could outrun the guilt and the grief. What happens now? He asked. The operator stood up, moving to the side of the booth. He reached out and lifted the barrier arm. Now you make a choice. You can keep driving. Stay on this road for another 12 years. Another 100. Keep pretending you're going somewhere. Or, he gestured to the darkness beyond the toll booth. But now Derek could see something else. A light. Warm and golden. Different from the cold yellow of the booth. You can go forward. Accept the toll. Move on to whatever comes next. Will Sarah be there? I don't know. I'm just the toll operator. I collect the payment and open the gate. What's beyond? He smiled sadly. That's different for everyone. Derek looked at the light. Then back at the highway behind him, that endless, empty stretch of road he'd been driving for 12 years. I'm scared, he admitted. Everyone is. But Derek? The operator put a hand on the car door. You've been running long enough. Don't you want to rest? Derek thought about Sarah. The fight they'd had that night seemed so stupid now. She'd wanted him to stay in Millfield. Wanted them to build a life together. He'd wanted Chicago. Wanted opportunity. Wanted more than their small town could offer. Both of them so sure they were right, neither willing to compromise. And now they'd spent 12 years apart because Derek couldn't let go. Couldn't accept what had happened. Couldn't stop driving. Okay, Derek said softly. Okay, I'm ready. The operator nodded. He stepped back, raising the barrier arm higher. Derek put the car in drive. As he pressed the accelerator, moving forward toward that golden light, he felt something shift. The car beneath him became less solid, less real. The highway, the toll booth, even his own body started to fade. The last thing he saw was the operator, standing in his booth, watching with that same sad smile, waiting for the next traveler. The next soul who couldn't accept the toll they'd already paid. And then Derek was in the light, and the light was warm, and he wasn't driving anymore. He was home. Asterisk. They found the car 12 years ago, wrapped around a tree on Interstate 72. Derek Chen, 23, and Sarah Mitchell, 22, both dead at the scene. The police report noted that neither was wearing a seatbelt, that the vehicle had been traveling well above the speed limit, that there were no skid marks suggesting the driver had attempted to brake before impact. A tragic accident. A waste of 2 young lives. The car was towed away, the road was cleaned, and eventually, people forgot. But if you drive that stretch of I-72 late at night, alone, pay attention. You might see a toll booth that isn't on any map, a yellow light that shouldn't be there. And if you stop, if the operator tells you you've already paid, if he shows you a photograph of yourself from years ago, well, maybe it's time to stop driving. Maybe it's time to accept the toll and see what lies beyond. Because everyone reaches the booth eventually. Everyone pays the price. The only question is, how long will you keep driving before you're ready to move on? Asterisk.